Hello, welcome back. Today you get to hear the story of my friend Keldy. He's wonderful. I've heard his story so many times and I'm excited for you to hear it. It's a little bit longer today, so we're just going to hop right in.
Oh, okay. So, I'm a transgender man. I'm from Utah. There are a lot of different moving parts to my story, lots of little pieces, but it begins in Provo. I was born a beautiful, cute as a button little girl. I was born into the LDS church. My family was very strong in the church, and that was kind of the defining piece of information about me as a kid, other than I really loved fishing with my dad. So I was growing up a young lady, and I was very, very devoted to the church, and I wanted to be the best version of a young person that you could be when in the church. So what that meant for me was I was frequently a leader in the different young women's groups I was in. I was the president of the Beehives, My Maids, and the Laurels. And when you're 12 years old, you can start working on basically the equivalent of an Eagle Scout for a woman, which was called the Young Woman Recognitionhood Award. And you can start working on that when you're 12. And I got it when I was 12. I got it really, really fast because I just wanted to prove that I could do this. I read my scriptures daily. I was just very invested in showing that I was all in with my church belief.
Did you feel like it was because you wanted to prove this, or it was I just really did love it?
I think a little bit of both. I've always been pretty competitive and eager to show that I'm capable of doing things even when I was just a kid. And I think I was good at it. I've always been very studious, so it was easy for me to kind of study and get really into it. And then a big part of me did really love it as well. I loved the values that came with my church upbringing. I loved that my family was the most important part of my life. I have 3 brothers and sisters, and my parents and I are still super close to this day. So I loved the importance of family, and I loved that it was so studious. I've always liked reading, so that was fun for me.
That's cool.
Yeah. This presented a problem for me, though, when I got into middle school and high school. And at this time I was a young lady, and I realized that I wasn't excited to turn 16 and get to ask boys out on dates or have them ask me out on dates, because I realized I wasn't really attracted to the boys at my high school. I did find that I was attracted to some of the women in my high school, some of the girls at my high school. And this, at the time, this was the late 90s, early 2000s. This wasn't something that was really talked about in my circles, about same gender attraction or homosexuality, whatever you want to call it. So I just assumed, well, this isn't good because it doesn't say anything about this in the church. And that was all I really knew. And, you kind of heard whisperings off to the side at this point. Well, someone has a gay uncle, and oh, what do you do with that? I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, we just don't talk about it. And so when I was in high school, I started having these really vivid nightmares that I would be, separated from my family in whatever kind of eternal afterlife there was, and that I would be completely alone. And I felt so ashamed, and I would pray daily to not feel that kind of attraction. I thought there was something wrong with me.
Yeah.
I didn't understand how I could be feeling this attraction to women when I was trying so hard at my church, I was doing so good.
Yeah.
I was the Laurels president. Why is this happening to me?
Mm-hmm. Did you talk to anyone about it?
Oh, absolutely not.
No,
absolutely not. Nope.
Oh, you're carrying that.
Yeah. So that was really difficult. I kind of, got into this cycle when I was in my teenage years of just, having a very happy face, and then late at night when I'm by myself, I would just kind of wallow in how much I hated myself and why I felt so stuck. I was trying really hard not to be this thing. And in my interpretation of the gospel at the time, if I am this and I can't stop being this, I'm kind of damned. I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. So I kind of just accepted that towards the end of my high school experience. I kind of just accepted, well, I've tried to change this for the past couple of years. I've done everything that I've, whatever you could Google in the early internet of those times, pray more, read your scriptures. Yeah. And I did those things, and it didn't change how I felt. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of just accepted, well, I think I'm just maybe a bad person. I don't think I've done anything bad, but I think there's something intrinsically bad about me because I can't change this. So once I graduated high school and went on to college, it was kind of like an opportunity. Everyone thinks college is a new opportunity to reinvent yourself. And I just kind of presented myself to my new friends at college who hadn't known me my whole childhood as someone who had been openly a lesbian their whole lives. And no one questioned it. I've always had a very masculine face. I was always very butch for a woman, you know. And so I never came out to anyone as a lesbian.
You didn't have to.
I didn't have to. I looked like a lesbian. And my new college friends were like, oh, sure, you're gay anyway. Like, what are you doing in class? You know, they didn't care. And I was like, oh. And so I had kind of just accepted that I was probably not going to have the life I had originally thought I was going to have when I was growing up. But I just stopped going to church and just kind of lived as a person who had the confidence that, yes, I'm a lesbian and nobody cares. Yeah. And it was fine. But there still felt something really wrong inside. Like there was a part of me that still was pretty on board the Keldy's a bad person train. Yeah. And again, I could acknowledge I didn't do anything bad. I just felt bad.
So at this point, are you living two different lives? Like, does your family know that you're just at college? You're like, yeah, I'm a lesbian.
That's a good question. I don't think, I ever acknowledged with my parents that I was a lesbian either. I think they were just kind of watching from the sidelines because I would go over to their house every couple of weeks for dinner or to catch up on class. Yeah. And, I could see that they were worried and had questions, but we'd never really talked about it. Because by the time I had been in college for a couple of weeks, we had some bigger fish to fry anyway. So also while I was in college, the first time I went to college was to culinary school. And in a lot of like popular media like The Bear, you'll see, chefs doing drugs and drinking. And that is absolutely a real thing that happens in culinary school. All of my peers in culinary school were either people that heavily used alcohol or drugs or were straight up drug addicts. I met a couple people that were heroin addicts in my first week of culinary school. And so I kind of got to talking to them about it, and I had smoked weed a little bit towards the end of high school, and I realized it didn't ruin my life, and I was like, okay, that's fine. But I started learning a little bit about different substances that people use, and I started smoking more weed my first semester of culinary school, and I found that when I was high, I didn't feel as bad about myself. So it kind of solved that problem for me. It never lasted. That's why I had to smoke more the next day. Yeah. But in the time I was high, I didn't hate myself. So I had found a solution for the problem that nothing else had worked for at that point.
A relief.
Yeah, it was a relief. It was a break. When I would go and visit my family, they'd have quizzical looks on their face for all sorts of things, I'm sure. But it was nothing we really talked about. My grades were fine. And nothing, my house wasn't burning down. I didn't have any broken limbs. So I guess a double life could be a way of putting it. I think I just didn't really share much about how I was feeling.
So you weren't intentionally saying, I'm not going to talk to my parents about this. It's just like, I'm figuring stuff out. There's nothing to say.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I think that was kind of my perspective on it anyway, they would be embarrassed if they knew I was a lesbian. They'd be twice as embarrassed if they knew I was a lesbian that was smoking weed in college. So we just won't bring it up. Yeah. I don't think I really wanted my family. I felt like they would be burdened if they knew that about me. So I think I intentionally hid it from them. Yeah. But it also just, I never really had a thought like I probably should tell someone about this. Yeah. I think I was really afraid of embarrassing my parents. But yeah, I had been smoking weed for a couple of months in college when I was outside of the library on my college campus, and I traded a cigarette I wanted a cigarette, and I traded a 5-spot of weed, which is like maybe $3 worth of weed, just a little bit of crumb, for someone else who had a cigarette, and I wanted their cigarette, and I traded that. And the campus police rolled up on some Segways, and they actually charged me with 3 felonies in 2009. In 2009, you could get 3 felonies for that amount of weed. And I actually ended up getting arrested, and I was confused as to why, because I offered them brownies and stuff. They were normal brownies. They weren't pot brownies, but I couldn't charm my way out of that one. So I ended up going to Utah County Jail that day, and that's the first time I ever got arrested. Those are the first charges I ever had. And I went through the process of intake. I went to the women's side, and I was in the jail for a couple of days because I was, I kind of made up my mind as they were moving me in the police cruiser down to Utah County Jail. I'm just not going to call anyone. Everyone will think I'm missing for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or whatever, but I'm not going to call anyone to get me out because then they'll know. They'll know that I've been smoking weed and selling weed and stuff like this on top of all my schoolwork, and like they'll be so mad and they'll be so embarrassed and so ashamed of me. So I'll just stay in jail. I made it, I think, 3 or 4 days before I kind of broke down crying because the girls in there were crazy. And I wasn't used to being in a place like Utah County Jail, so I broke down crying a couple days in and called my mom because my bail was only like $200 or $300. And I'll never forget, when you make a phone call from the jail, you have to kind of do like a pre-recorded message, and you have to listen to it on your end as it's being played for the person who you're calling. And there was like the little pre-recording that said, "You have a collect call from Utah County Jail. Keldy Zabriskie would like to connect. Like, press 1 to accept." And so I was listening to that. And my mom picked up the phone and she was just so confused. And she was like, "Keldy, what? Are you in jail? Like, what is going on?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm in jail. Please come get me." I was crying. It took maybe a couple of hours, which is pretty fast for someone who's never had to bail a child out of jail. Yeah. But I was released, and she came and picked me up. And we actually went out to a park, and she's like, "You have to tell me everything that's going on." I said, "No problem." So I told her about like the substances I had been using, like drinking and smoking weed and smoking cigarettes, nothing too serious. But I didn't really tell her why. I made up some excuses, some poor relationships I had had, some things that those sound like valid excuses why someone would use, but they weren't the real reason, Yeah. And so my parents, they helped me sign up to go to an inpatient rehab for substance use counseling. And it was a 90-day program, and it was a condition of parole or probation. I was put on probation from those 3 felonies that I had to complete an inpatient substance use treatment. And so they helped me sign up and go to rehab. And I went to rehab for 90 days, and I completed it. And I wasn't really willing to be honest in that rehab, so it didn't help a ton. I was kind of just waiting to get out so I could use more substances. Because at this point, I had kind of acknowledged, well, I am suicidal the amount I hate myself when I'm not high. So it was really important for me to get high because I didn't want to die, but I definitely feared acting on that suicidal ideation when I wasn't high.
It was a survival tactic for you.
Exactly. So once I completed that treatment, I actually ended up going to jail a couple weeks after I completed that treatment for failure to pay a fine because I had no money because I was in treatment. So I was in the jail, and I had been sober for a little over 90 days, from everything. But I was back in jail for failure to pay a fine, and I had to be there for about 2 months this time. And it wasn't as scary the second time because I kind of knew the ropes. Like, I had talked to a lot of people in 12-step meetings who had been to jail, and they're like, "It's not too bad. Like, don't worry. You'll be okay. They'll take care of you. Like, look at you. You're such a handsome woman. You'll make friends." And I did. And so I was just kind of hanging out in jail when maybe 2 or 3 weeks after I'd gotten there, I saw an inmate walk in, and she was coming in from intake. So she had only been there for a couple of days. And I recognized her. She was actually the ex-girlfriend of someone I had went to treatment with. Oh. And I had met her once in the couple weeks between me graduating that treatment center and going to jail. This is really romantic. So my friend from treatment had called me. He knew that I was still sober, and he needed some clean urine to pass a urine analysis drug test. And so he asked Keldy, "Can you sell me some of your pee?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely. That'll be $100. And so I had like a paper cup full of my pee. And he sent his girlfriend at the time, who was this girl, to come collect this pee for me. And I was like, "Hey, nice to meet you. My name is Keldy. Here's some pee." And she's like, "Great." And so I recognized her from that time, and she came into my cell block, and she was like just devastated, sobbing, really upset. And I've always been a person who can be kind of calm, and I can have a little bit of a calming presence, and the deputies knew that about me, so they put her in my cell, and we became best friends, like, right away. I thought she was super cute. She thought I was super handsome, and so we hang out all day in our cell together. When we had our, like, hour of rec time, and we could go walk around in the concrete yard, we'd go walk around together and, like, try to hold hands. It was really sweet. And we actually made a plan that once we got out of Utah County Jail, we would just start officially dating and everything, and we did. So we were cellmates for about a month and some change or something. Then I got out and she got out, and we met up and we started dating. And she was a heroin addict. And, I did some numbers crunching. I did a lot of really smart work. And I figured out that of all of the drugs that exist, Heroin was one that was detected in UAs or urine drug test for probably the least amount of time. And so I had not done heroin at this point. I had kind of experimented with different narcotic pills, but I hadn't done heroin. And so I decided I want to do heroin because I can't just not do drugs. I'm afraid I'll die if I do that. So she taught me how to do heroin, and I loved it.
Quick.
Yeah.
So why, for the majority of the people that were in your social sphere, why is everyone else using? Is it the same as you, or is it like addicted? Because for you, you didn't really find yourself addicted. It was like, I need this to stay alive.
Yeah.
Does that seem like a similar trend for most people?
I think if most people were really honest with themselves why they became addicted, because most people don't start doing drugs and are immediately addicted.
Yeah.
I think most people, if they can be really honest and vulnerable, they can recognize that addiction stems from one of two places. One is just pleasure seeking. If you're bored or have some sort of processing, disorder, and you're not entertained by anything, well, what's more entertaining than being high? Nothing. And the other one, which is a really big one and is hard to talk about, is pain avoidance. Yeah. Not everyone's going to have the same pain that I had because my pain was caused by gender and sexuality. But a lot of people get addicted to drugs from pain avoidance.
Okay.
Yeah. And, that's a really simplified answer, but I think that's true. But yeah, mine was absolutely pain avoidance. And you see that a lot with addicts. No one starts addicted, but a lot of people find whatever drug they're doing is the answer to their problem. Their problem is I'm in pain and I don't know what to do. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Can you jump back in?
Yeah.
So you're dating?
Yeah, so we're dating. We got a little trailer together in a Springville trailer park. And I went to work every day to make money, to have money to buy and sell heroin, and she stayed at home and played house, and it was really sweet. During this whole process, we lived in that trailer for a year and some change. We lived together at different places outside of this trailer, but that was probably the most stable housing we had. We were both on probation. We both would make it a couple months before a probation officer caught us and sent us back to jail for a couple weeks, a couple months. But I got to be a very good drug addict. My family at this time, they knew that I had been relapsing, and they knew that I had graduated to bigger and harder drugs than weed. There were plenty of times my parents caught me nodding off at family dinners or just canceling dinners at all because I was too dope sick or withdrawing to go. They knew, and they offered help, but I had actively and on purpose been trying to push them away because how embarrassing to have this daughter that, one, they knew I was dating a girl, and, again, it was still something we never really talked about. For a while, they called her my special friend, and I thought that was kind of sweet. But, they had this daughter that not only was gay, which was my biggest fear of them finding out and being ashamed, but now a heroin addict. Yeah. So I tried to push them away because I didn't want them to be associated with me. They had family friends that were good people that worked hard and helped others, and I was a person that took, and I could recognize that dichotomy. My family's too good for this, so they should stay away from me. Honestly, the only reason I think a lot of the times they heard from me was because they still continued to pay for my cell phone so they could at least know that I was alive.
Yeah.
And
that's so heavy on both sides.
Yeah. It was not a great deal for either one of us. I've to this day, my parents were very, very, very patient to deal with all of that the way they did. But they did the best they could. No one really teaches you how to have a drug addict child,
It's not in the manual.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the time I was dating this girl, I'd basically, one of us would go to jail, one of us would go to rehab, one of us would overdose, and then the cycle would continue. We'd get back to the trailer, we'd just keep doing drugs. And we lived that way for a couple of years until in 2012, I was actually on house arrest because almost the whole time I was a heroin addict, I was able to still be in management positions in different jobs I had, which I don't know how exactly I did that. I think I'm just kind of a people person. But because I was able to give money to my probation office, they actually approved one of my jail sentences to be served as house arrest. So I had a big ankle monitor. Yeah. I was on house arrest for 2 years because I kept getting caught. I was still doing drugs on house arrest, which is hard to do, but I did it. I had been on house arrest for a couple of months, And my girlfriend had gone up to West Valley to hang out with some friends she had up there. And I got a call from one of her friends saying, hey, Keldy, there's bad news. This girl has overdosed on heroin. And I said, yeah, no problem. Because to me, this was run of the mill. Both of us had overdosed plenty of times. And I said, okay, well, you have her call me when she wakes up. I'll come pick her up and stuff. And her friend said, no, like, this is actually pretty bad. We were too scared to call the ambulance. And so she's in a coma at the hospital up in West Valley. And I said, oh, time kind of stopped and my heart just sank. And I didn't know what to do with that because that was not run of the mill.
Yeah.
And so I ended up calling my probation officer and asking for special permission, even though I was technically incarcerated. Hey, can I go to this hospital up in West Valley? My girlfriend's in a coma up there. And she gave me permission, and I went up there, and I met her and her dad, who was her last remaining family. She came from a family full of addiction and a really tragic life. And so her dad was the last remaining family she had. And her dad and I spoke with the doctors, and the decision was made on Thanksgiving Day of 2012 to take her off of life support because she would not have recovered. So she passed away, and I kind of moved in for a time with my parents. And I didn't really know what to do at that point because I was really depressed, and I had been depressed. But it was really easy to distract myself from how much I didn't like myself for my life with this girl, and now I didn't have that distraction. All I had was a really broken heart. It was maybe about 2 months before she passed away. We were sitting in our trailer in Springville, and I was kind of just surfing the web and reading articles that people had written about their lives. And I read one article that was written by a trans woman, and this was in like early 2012. So this wasn't really a super common to talk about thing back then. You could read about it on Tumblr. I don't know if you remember Tumblr.
I don't.
Yeah. Okay. But it was like before Twitter. So I was reading this article written by a trans woman about her experience, and I thought I knew what trans women were, but I didn't really know. I thought it was the same as like a cross-dresser or drag queen. I didn't really know until I read this article. I found it really interesting. I was like, oh, that's crazy that they have like the medical devices to like make this happen. Like that's amazing. And she also mentioned in this article the existence of trans men, and I did not know that was an option at all.
Crossed your mind.
It never even crossed my mind that was something anyone could do.
Yeah.
And so that was really the first time I had realized that trans men were like a viable medical option for people. And I turned to my partner while I was reading that. And it was probably the first time I ever expressed out loud or even thought, this could be what my problem is. Because up until then, I was being a junkie, so it wasn't at the forefront of my mind, but I had started wearing these big keffeyehs. They're those big scarves you see like soldiers in the desert wear with the kind of a houndstooth pattern and stuff, because I was really ashamed of my breasts.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't really speak in public unless I was around really close friends because I looked like a boy. And when people realized that I wasn't a boy, they would get really weird and awkward, and they'd be like, oh, I'm sorry, I just assumed you were a boy because of like everything about you. So I just kind of stopped talking. And so when I heard about this transgender man, I told my partner, like, I think this could be me. And she said, if you ever try to pursue that, I'll break up with you and you'll never hear from me again. I said, okay, well, case closed. I guess this isn't me because that can't happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and are you like thinking about your life long term at this point? Like, are obviously no at one, to some extent, but are you like, yeah, this is gonna be my life. I'm gonna be in and out. I'm gonna be doing drugs, and I've got to be able to be doing that for the next 40 years. Or were you kind of like, were you able to think long term, or because of where you're at, that wasn't even really a thing?
I didn't think long term because I didn't think I had long term.
Okay.
Even before my girlfriend passed away, when I was 19 or 20, and I had already been to jail 3 or 4 times, and I had been to 2 or 3 treatment centers, and I had overdosed once or twice, I had kind of just accepted, well, I'm not going to kill myself, but I'm still probably going to die before I'm 25. And I was just okay with that, because how does someone come back from this life,
Yeah.
I didn't really want to, and I didn't know how I could anyway, because if I'm not on heroin, I'm going to try and kill myself. So I just kind of accepted, like, it would be better to die a tragic overdose than to kill myself. So I guess that's just what's going to happen to me. And I genuinely believed that. I know my girlfriend at the time did too. She's just happened to be the one that overdosed. So I didn't have any long-term thoughts.
Okay.
I would occasionally, even after my girlfriend passed away, I would occasionally think back to that conversation, to that article, and I had started reading more about like people who were transgender men and their experience. But it didn't really matter because to me, well, this is something that requires a lot of time and effort and money, and I don't have any of those. And even if I did, I'm probably not going to make it out of this heroin addiction alive anyway. So what's the point,
Yeah.
But yeah, after she passed away, things that were already pretty bad in my life, they got worse. The cycle of me going to rehab kind of, I went to rehab again once or twice, but I ended up overdosing many more times. I ended up going to jail for longer periods of time. I started going through bouts of homelessness. My parents wouldn't let me back in the house. They changed the locks, and for good reason. I had stolen hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars from their house. I had pawned items that belonged to my siblings. And I kind of just accepted, well, this is who I am, and I don't like it, but this is all I know how to do. Because I don't know how to deal with the emotion of losing my girlfriend. I don't know what to do with the emotion of wondering if this transgender thing is me. I don't even know how to deal with the emotion that I had a girlfriend in the first place. Like, there were so many things that I really hated about myself, and all I knew to do with all of those feelings was use heroin and other fun drugs I picked up along the way. But there was one point in 2015, so it had been 3 years since my girlfriend had passed away, that I'd been homeless for a couple of months, and I was sleeping on a friend's that was on his porch next to the Provo liquor store. And I had to go do a probation check-in because this whole time I'm still on probation. I'm still finding ways to check in with my probation officer because I don't want them to put a warrant out for my arrest. And so I was going to go check in with my probation officer in the summer of 2015, and I had my little homeless guy backpack on, and inside my little homeless guy backpack was just dozens of used syringes, like all my most prized possessions, which were drug paraphernalia and like phone chargers. And so I walked up to the Provo probation office, and I didn't really know what to do with my backpack because I don't want to lose it. Everything I own is in here, and more important than anything that I own is all of my drugs are in here. But I also can't take this into the probation office. Like, this office is owned by police, and they don't like that. So I thought I was really smart, and I hid it in the bushes outside the door. I was like, surely no one will see this. And I walked into the probation office, and I sat down, and it had been maybe 3 or 4 minutes before the police came in after me carrying my backpack.
Hid it right by the door.
It was right next to the front door. Listen, I was on a lot of drugs. I wasn't thinking very clearly. That was my best thought at the time, is just put it in the bushes. So they came and carried my backpack, and they sat down in front of all of us in the waiting room of the probation office because it was me and a couple other people that were probationers, and they said, okay, whose backpack is this? And none of us really answered, least of all me. And they said, all right, well, have it your way then. They start pulling everything out of this backpack. They've got their, exam gloves on, and they're pulling out syringes and, random books, ticket stubs from the train, like all of my prized possessions. And eventually they pulled out a prescription pill bottle that had my name on it. And they said, all right, Keldy, you come with us. And so they took me to meet with my probation officer, and they told me that they could give me 32 additional felonies from the contents of that backpack because every syringe, every drug wrapper, everything was drug paraphernalia or possession because it was inside of a police station. I said, no, well, that's not good. The probation officer was very, very kind to me and didn't actually give me any new charges from that. He did say he was going to give me one last chance at Utah County Jail before I was sent to the prison up in Draper.
And you hadn't been there yet.
I had not been to prison, no. I still haven't been to prison, so humble brag for me.
Humble brag.
But thank you. They sent me back to Utah County Jail for one last time, and they said, usually you get out early on good behavior. You are going to serve your whole sentence this time, which was, I think, 6 months. And in the 6 months I was there, they also told me I needed to complete the inpatient substance use disorder treatment program they had inside of the jail. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to an inpatient substance use disorder treatment center outside of a jail or inside of a jail, do it first incorrectly outside of the jail because they're a lot nicer if they're not inside of a jail. But I did complete that program, and it left me, by the time I was done with that program inside of the jail, I had about 2 months left to kind of just sit in the jail and wait to be released. And at this time, I was almost 25 years old, and I kind of all I had time for was time to think. I'd read all the books, there are good books in the jail. And so I just kind of sat and thought a lot, and I realized that I don't know anyone over the age of 25 that's a heroin addict because they all have died before then. Like most of my friends who, I had used with had either died or gone to prison, and I didn't know anyone who used heroin over the age of 25 because they don't make it that long. And I had a desire to stop using. I had that desire to stop using for a while. I just didn't know what to do because even when I was in treatment, I would kind of pardon my French, but I'd kind of half-ass it. I would do what they told me to do, and I'd do just enough to get out of the program and go back to my life. But my life wasn't good, and I didn't want to go back. I just didn't want to do the really hard stuff they told me to do, like be really honest, be vulnerable.
So you had never been honest up until this point. You still never told anyone that you hated yourself?
No, I'm sure they, kind of came to that conclusion.
Yeah.
I would tell people that I didn't like myself, but I wasn't really honest with myself. I would always be really quick to admit to things I had done wrong. To my probation officer, to my family when they were visiting me at the treatment center, to my friends. Like, if I made a mistake, I'd be really quick to be like, look, I messed up. Yeah. But I wasn't very honest with myself. So I knew I hated myself, and I knew that I had kind of done some of the work that they told me to do in the treatment centers and stuff like that, but I still didn't like myself, and I still just didn't really care if I lived or died. But while I was sitting there in jail, I decided, well, even if I don't care for myself, if I live or die, I think I need to at least acknowledge that my family would not be happy if I died. Yeah. And, I still feel like this giant burden to them, but maybe I can find a way to be happy in some form, and it would feel like I'm less of a burden to them if that's the case. And I had done 12-step programming. I have done all types of therapy, CBT, DBT, EMDR. I had done all of it. But there was only one thing I hadn't tried, and that was exploring the little voice in the back of my head saying, you could be transgender, maybe you just don't know because you don't know that much about it. And so I decided when I was in jail that instead of going back to using heroin when I got out, because I would have 6 months of clean time. That's probably the longest amount of clean time I'd had since I was 18. I decided instead of just going back to heroin, I would at least try to talk to a gender therapist and see what they thought. And so that's the little promise I made to myself. I said, this is really the only thing I haven't tried. I'm going to give it a shot. And I got out of jail, and I got put in a sober living house, and I got a job as a manager at Subway for all the sandwiches. I got free sandwiches, so it was a great deal. And I did not do that at all. I did not reach out to anyone. I didn't ask for help. I didn't even ask for a gender therapist in my area. I was like, well, that was stupid, and obviously I'm fine. That lasted, I'm totally good. That lasted about 30 days before that same, kind of depression and self-hatred kind of just settled down on me. It built up enough that it was enough that I had started thinking to myself, I should probably just call my dealer and get some heroin because that feeling's coming back. Yeah. And it was 8 o'clock some random Tuesday in one of my shifts at Subway, and I was closing up the shop where I was getting ready to call my dealer. And for some reason, instead, I ended up Googling gender therapist or endocrinologist in Provo. And I found a phone number for someone in the Provo that could see me, that took my insurance, and I gave her a call thinking I'd probably get a voicemail and ask her to call me back the next day or something. But she actually picked up the phone, and I thought that was really strange. But I kind of told her where I was coming from. I told her for the past couple of years I've been wondering if I'm transgender and I'm a heroin addict and I don't want to relapse and I don't really know what to do. Can I see you? And she actually was able to schedule me to go in the next day. And she connected me with someone whose entire job is gender therapy, and all they do is diagnose gender dysphoria disorder. And I brought in all of my paperwork from all of my treatment centers I had ever been in. I gave them to her, and in like 3 hours of looking through my paperwork, she said, "Oh yeah, you are this to a T. Like, this is a perfect description of you. You'd be an excellent candidate to start HRT if that's what you want to do." And I said, "I think it's what I want to do." Hormone replacement therapy. It took me maybe a week or two from there to actually get testosterone, which were the hormones I would be taking as a transgender man. And I started taking them, and I felt like, I didn't feel anything physically. A little bit of hormones in 2 weeks in doesn't do anything for you. But just knowing that I had done this, I had started this process, it felt like a huge wave of relief. Because I think there was some part of me that had known for a long time, like, this is something you want to do. The reason you haven't done this is because you have no stability, because you're afraid of starting it and then losing it halfway through the process because you'll relapse and go to jail, and then you did all that for what? And because you don't know anyone that's trans, and that's scary. Yeah. But just starting it was probably the hardest part of my entire medical transition. And you don't feel any like changes in your secondary sexual characteristics overnight. It takes a while to build up enough HRT for there to start being changes, but eventually, like, I started putting on a little bit of muscle, and my voice started deepening a little bit, which was great because I still wouldn't talk to anyone in public until my voice started dropping and my face started matching a little bit more. And so I felt like a renewed sense of confidence. And this whole time I wasn't relapsing, and I was, doing some other stuff for my recovery. But this is the first time I had sustained lengths of sobriety. And I didn't really change that much from what I was doing for my recovery before and now. The new factor for me was the hormone replacement therapy. And I started hating myself less almost immediately.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And, I called my mom after I'd been on hormones for about, 3 or 4 weeks, a couple of little testosterone shots in. And I told her, well, let's go get lunch. And I think she probably asked me, like, have you relapsed? And I was like, no, but totally understandable concern. I just need to talk to you. And I think we went to like Magglebee's or something in Provo. And I was like, hey, I was really scared to talk to her because I was afraid she would disown me. But I figured, what do I have to lose? I've already done so many things to embarrass my parents and to make them dislike me, and I think they still like me despite it all. So, I'll roll the dice. Yeah. And I told her I am going to start hormone replacement therapy, even though I had already started. And what that means is I'm going to start a medical transition to be a man instead of a woman. And, this was 2015. Still, not many people talked about that. And she heard me out, but she was pretty upset. She was crying and told me that, aren't you worried that you'll go bald and get fat? And maybe I should have been more concerned about the hairline, but I wasn't, because I said, you know what, it's okay if I'm bald and fat. I think this might save my life. And so she had questions about, like, could she call me her son or her daughter? Like, what would she call me? I told her, I don't care what you call me. I just want to try this because I think it could be what saves me. And so it took my parents, I think, 2 years. I never told them. I never really fought back or anything when they called me their daughter. I didn't really care because I truly felt like I had nothing to lose. And, obviously I had been thinking about this about myself for years, and this was new information for them. So it took them, I think, 2 years for them to start referring to me as their son. And they did that of their own accord. And that was their timing that they wanted. And I remember the first time they called me their son, like, it felt really good, and I was like really proud of them. I thought it was really cool. But yeah, after I had started that process of HRT, everything kind of just got easier for me. After I'd been on HRT for a year, I had started making friends that kind of knew that I was in this transition process. They didn't care. They asked questions, and I was open about it, and they were interested in my life and like this process for me, and they were super supportive.
No relapse?
No relapse. I never used heroin again after I started HRT. But yeah, a year into it, I got a double mastectomy, which was a big deal for me because I had big breasts and they were hard to hide, but I tried to hide them a lot. I think I wore like 6 sports bras stacked on top of each other. It made my ribs like a weird shape. It took years for my ribs to recover. And that was probably like one of the bigger game changers in my experiences, having in the transgender world, they call that top surgery.
Okay.
And that made it so I could go to the gym and work out and get real big muscles. And I felt so confident and so physically healthy that, yeah, I never relapsed. I've been sober since June 19th of 2012, which is the day I got arrested. From there, I've just had a pretty normal life. I have a house and a truck and 2 dogs and a partner, and I work in recovery where I coach teenagers in how to do substance use recovery work. So,
Do you work transgender youth, or is it more just substance abuse?
the focus of my work is substance use. I have had a couple of kids come through my little orbit of where I work that are LGBTQ kids, but the vast majority of them are, just cis straight teenage boys. So,
Navigating life.
yeah.
Well, that's super cool. I'm so grateful for your story, your vulnerability. It seems like it probably took you a long time to be willing to share those pieces of you.
Yeah, I think I didn't really want to talk about for a long time because it was really painful and it felt embarrassing. But once I was on the other side of it, I had no problem sharing those stories. I was like, well, maybe someone, if they can hear my story, they can know that they are not alone and they're not that weird for what they're going through.
You can save them 5 years of this pain avoidance.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. Well, I am curious about what you would tell people that don't have interaction with people that are transgender specifically.
Mm-hmm.
People that have children that are navigating that. Kind of like you said, there's no manual, but what would you say to people that are navigating that?
I would offer 2 pieces of advice. One to the parents, which is, again, lead with compassion. If you don't know a lot about transgender issues and why your child is transitioning, take a compassionate approach and ask them, and be genuinely willing to hear them and try to understand and practice some empathy when they talk about pain they may have experienced, any sort of dysphoria they may experience, and just generally be supportive and compassionate. I think if I had been willing to tell my parents about my experience with, kind of questioning if I was transgender years before I had actually been willing to talk about it, I think they probably would have supported me, and maybe I could have avoided a couple of years of going to jail and overdosing with the right support. So approach it with compassion. And then the second piece of advice I would offer would be to the transgender person who's just telling their parents. That's a really scary thing to do. And not every parent is going to respond the way that my parents respond. I have a dear friend who is a transgender woman and just came out to her parents a couple of months ago, and they have effectively disowned her, and she's an adult woman. So, experience will vary, but I would offer the advice to the transgender person is having the courage to be yourself will improve the quality of your life, even if you lose relationships. And sometimes you'll lose relationships temporarily, because this is new information the transgender person is offering their parents. Like, it was new information when I told my mom, hey, I'm transgender, or at least I think I am, and this is what I'm doing. But I had known that for years, so it came as quite a shock to my mom. And it was something we didn't really talk about for the first 2 years of my transition. She told me, you'll always be my child. She didn't call me her son or her daughter. She said, you're my child. And I said, that's fine. But, on her end, those 2 years, turns out she was reading and studying and trying to understand what it meant to be transgender. And she did that out of an act of love, and eventually came around to be very supportive. And now she asks me questions about my experience as a transgender person very openly, and we can have those conversations. So be patient and be courageous, because both of those things are going to be good for you as a person.
Yeah, you have a wonderful mom, but I also think you're such a great example of giving grace on the end of someone. Like you're saying, this brand new information that can be really scary, not just for you, but for the people that you're telling. And I think it's sometimes hard to tell people in your shoes, give everyone else grace when you're like, I'm hurting. I've been hurting for 5 years, your whole life.
Right.
But I don't know. I just think that really, it's made your experiences probably a lot better, your relationships a lot better. And I know you have wonderful parents because I know them, but
I do have wonderful parents.
they really are. They're great examples.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is a question that I ask everyone because the goal of this podcast is to for belonging by hoping people to be proximate to your story and just see by getting to know you I have more empathy for someone in your shoes. I don't jump to conclusions that I hear in the media.
Mm-hmm.
But you're human, like you said, you have hobbies. What's transgender is the most important thing about you. It's probably that you love fishing.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you'd much rather talk about that. But so I'm curious, where have you found belonging? Where have you felt like you are seen and loved and wanted?
Yeah. I adore where I work, and I know there I'm talking about another issue that's something from my past, but I'm the director of a substance use disorder treatment program for adolescents, and I really love my work there because I get to perform service on a daily basis for people that need service, other addicts. And I get to support and talk to the families of those addicts and hear their experience. And it's just a really great place to be where I can share a lot of compassion and help people carry their pain and their loads and help them learn how to process that in a better way than relying on substance. So that's something I really love to do, something where I feel a lot of passion. Some personal hobbies of mine are I love to read. For the past couple of years, I've had a goal of reading one book a week. I have not officially hit that goal. I usually get pretty close, like 45 books in a year.
Wow.
But I love to read and I love to learn. I also love sharing books. I'm a member of a couple different book clubs, so I love reading. And then outdoor rec is probably my third secret passion that's not very secret. I've got like 17 hammocks, and both of my dogs go hiking with me all the time in the summer. Love fishing, camping, anything. I go to the top of Timp every year. So those are some things that I really love doing. And that's where I found all three of those kind of areas or places, I found a really good sense of community. Yeah, I would, as far as reading and outdoor rec go, I've even started like some little social clubs where, LGBTQ people come together and we'll go and play board games or, start a book club together in Utah County. It's been really nice to kind of foster that community as well.
I think it's amazing. I do want to touch, and this might be kind of jumping back to our conversation, but I do think a lot of people have questions about medical transitioning and terminology.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you could walk through a little bit, what is medical transitioning? Maybe just clarify some even terminology for people, or understanding what that is. Like, it sounds like it starts with
HRT.
HRT. So maybe, could you start there and kind of give us a little understanding as to what that all entails?
Yeah. So I'll do my best to kind of describe the things that I know are talked about pretty often and just in news around Utah and more general cultural things. And, all this with the caveat that I'm not a doctor. So this is,
personal experience.
Yeah. All right. So transgender would just be an umbrella term that covers anyone who's not cisgender. Cisgender means sex and gender align. So the sexual term you get is either a male or a female with those anatomical parts aligns with your gender assigned at birth. So that's cisgender. Anything that's not that would fall under a transgender umbrella. So that could include intersex, which is a person with ambiguous sexual organs at birth.
Mm-hmm.
That
and
could
hormones, right?
Yeah,
an
and
intersex
hormones.
person would be born with hormones, and is there one other thing that don't align with one gender or one sex?
If there is one other thing, I can't think of it right now, but you're probably right.
Okay.
But it's just anything that's ambiguous at birth,
Okay.
that doesn't align with either male or female.
Okay.
And that could look like a bunch of different things. It's actually really interesting, and that's not a new thing. It's been around since the existence of people.
We used to use the term hermaphrodite.
It just means anything too ambiguous to be assigned either male or female without some sort of caveat at birth.
Okay.
And under the transgender umbrella obviously falls transgender men. They're typically born female and transition to men, or transgender women who are typically born male and transition to female. And there are a couple of other things that could fall under the transgender umbrella, but those are typically the top three that I hear people talk about.
Would non-binary fall under this? Like, I don't align with male or female. Is that also considered transgender?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The non-binary, which is, like you said, someone who doesn't align with either male or female to describe their gender, would fall under the transgender umbrella because it is not cis.
Yeah. Okay.
So
anything not cis.
anything not cis could fall under that transgender umbrella. That doesn't mean everyone's going to claim that term, but all of those terms are nestled under there, and a person can decide if they want to claim to be transgender or not. But anything that is not cis would fall under that umbrella. Let's see. If we start at the very beginning, something I hear discussed pretty frequently is puberty blockers when they're talking about adolescent transgender people. Puberty blockers are again, not new. These have been around since the 40s and have been found, like, scientifically tested and are found to be safe for adolescents to use. And it's just something that will stop the natural hormone production that affects secondary sex characteristics in a person until they are old enough to decide if they want to actually pursue HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy. Okay. So if I, as a young woman when I was like 12, had started taking hormone blockers, the development of my breast would have basically been postponed. You would have to do some, deep digging to find what some potential side effects are, but the consensus is most of the effects of hormone blockers are completely reversible. It might affect height and weight a little bit in terms of how old you are versus how tall you are, because your hormones are being blocked for a period of time. Okay. It basically buys you some time to kind of slow down the hormonal process. I wish more people had talked about hormone blockers when I was a teenager. Then I wouldn't have double Ds by the time I realized that I wanted top surgery. It would have been easier to work with a B cup maybe. But so that's what hormone blockers do. Really interesting research and history to those, if anyone is curious about them. It is not the same as HRT, which replaces your hormones with a different hormone. It just basically presses pause on secondary sex characteristic maturation. Okay. HRT, or hormone replacement therapy, is the process of replacing your hormones. And these are hormones that affect secondary sex characteristics. So a transgender man would be taking testosterone or any other androgen, but I think it's mostly testosterone. Mm-hmm. I take testosterone, which is just the hormone that is produced in a biological or cis male.
And may I ask, if you stopped taking testosterone today?
Yeah, I think I would explode. I'm just kidding.
How quickly does that reverse, do you think?
So I have to take testosterone once a week in a intramuscular shot. So I put a syringe like in my thigh once a week, and it's just a tiny bit of testosterone. And I get labs done every 6 months with my endocrinologist to ensure that this is just the average level of testosterone for a man, your height, weight, and age. Okay. So I do that once a week. There have been times I've run out or have been unable to get a prescription refill, and I've had to go a couple of weeks without testosterone. And you can start to feel it pretty quickly when you don't have that once a week, because I have also had my original hormone makers, my ovaries have been removed. So I don't have any secondary sex characteristic hormone produced naturally outside of my pituitary gland, which is just a little tiny bit of hormones. Yeah. So I personally feel it pretty quickly because I don't have any other organs to rely on. Yeah. I think most trans men would probably report the same, especially if they've had their ovaries removed.
Okay, sorry, jumping back then.
Yeah, you're good.
Hormonal replacement therapy, we talked about that.
Yeah.
And then from there.
And then just the opposite end of that for trans women would be estrogen. And there are different ways to take estrogen. I'm not an expert in it because I don't take estrogen, but I think, my friends usually take estrogen capsules or pills that just once a day, like a daily medication. Okay. And whatever HRT does, whether you're a trans woman or a trans man, it only affects secondary sex characteristics. So body fat distribution, the development of breasts in trans women, the development of facial hair in trans men. So things that aren't primary sex characteristics. It could either raise your voice or lower your voice. Mm-hmm. There are also other things that people will do to try to accentuate or deflect from secondary sex characteristics depending on what direction they're moving in. Some trans men will do masculization surgery, or some trans women will do femination surgery to try to reshape their jaw or something like that, or laser hair removal to get rid of existing facial hair. So those are some things that people choose to do for secondary sex characteristics. Whether it's HRT or any other procedure done for a secondary sex characteristic, usually that's called gender affirming care. And that's another term that's commonly used as gender affirming care. So this isn't unique to transgender people. Plenty of people shave their legs, and that's gender affirming care. If we were to talk about strictly medicinal practices, again, like electronic hair removal, that's a medicinal practice. A lot of people are on HRT that aren't trans just because they were born with some hormonal imbalances, things like that. And that's all gender affirming care. So it doesn't need to be a transgender person. And if you really stop to think about it, you probably know someone who is cisgender who has some sort of gender affirming care in their history. So yeah,
That's helpful. I just think sometimes we're really quick to judge when we don't think about it, applying the exact same thing to our own lives.
Right.
Be careful of that.
Yeah, exactly. There are the last two things I would probably want to talk about as far as medical terminology would be either top surgery or bottom surgery, and those are exactly what they sound like. And, those are things that both trans men and trans women, and I don't know, if you're non-binary, these are all options that are just open to everyone. It could have to do with the gaining or losing breasts, or, the process of having genitalia that matches the rest of your body. None of these things are required. These are just options that people have to see if they want to pursue as part of their medical transition. A lot of people opt for it. A lot of people don't opt for it. A lot of people opt for half of those options, but not the other. And what's really important to remember for that is generally, in my experience, they're typically not things that are super covered by insurance. These are usually, or at least the last time I had a surgery, the trend was they're typically out of pocket, and I apologize if this is no longer accurate information. It's been years since I've had a surgery like that. And so these are things that people work really hard for. And the results would probably surprise you how well surgeons can do those operations. And again, this is gender affirming care. In the transgender community, no one is called more or less transgender based off of what care they receive. So it's a deeply personal thing, how many of those procedures you get, if you get those procedures at all. These are all just options for medical care. And if we looked at what terms there are outside of medical transitioning that we could address, one would just be social transitioning. And that's basically just the process of respecting pronoun changes, respecting name changes, using affirming language. Those are all a part of the process of social transitioning. So for me, I was really lucky. I was born with the name Keldy. I didn't need to change my name because it's just a nonsense, silly name. It's not a male or female name. It's just a silly name. But, if I was born and my name was like Sarah, I might want to change my name to Dylan. And so part of my social transition would be kind of introducing myself again to people who already know me. Like I would tell my mom, hey, I'm going through this social transition and I'm a transgender man. Would you mind calling me Dylan? I want to see how that makes me feel and how it makes you feel. I think this will help me with my mental health and help me be more true to who I am. So we can go ahead and try that, please. And, let's use he, him pronouns. So when I talked about previously how my parents never used male pronouns for me for the first 2 years, that would be part of a social transition. And, that was something that wasn't at the top of my priorities. But, a lot of people, that makes a big difference. If you are saving up money to start HRT and all you can do is a social transition, some of that, those basic considerations like, let's say my friend Caitlin is a transgender woman and she doesn't have the money to start HRT right now. So she can only do a social transition even while she's saving up for HRT. But she wants people at work to call her Caitlin. That could be a life-saving effort. And it's really simple.
Between life and death.
Exactly.
So many people, I just think, like when you talk about pronouns, people get all sorts of feathers ruffled. We're not doing that. You know what I mean? But to hear your story and to think that, I really love that explanation of, someone might not be able to afford the care that they need. And so using pronouns could be the difference between life and death for someone.
Yeah.
Like just thinking of you at 22, someone doing that for you could have meant so much.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of people's complaint, people that are in the school system or teaching, I can't remember. It's so hard to say they, them. It's so hard to make it work. Just to hear that could be the difference between life and death. And it's not this political thing. It's that I see you as a human being and I want to treat you in a way that makes you feel loved.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't have to be this political thing.
Right. It's really interesting. That reminds me of one of my favorite quotes ever since my first treatment center where I heard it. There's an author named, I think it's Barbara Johnson, and Thomas Monson actually quoted her in the past like 10 years. And the quote is, never let a problem to be solved be more important than a person to be loved. And that's always what I think of when I hear people kind of bickering about pronouns, because like, I just don't think it matters that much. Like, you know, if I can make you feel loved by calling you he instead of she, why wouldn't I? That costs me nothing. You know? And sure, it can be hard to remember sometimes, but people will correct you, you know, and we can all have a little bit of grace in that process.
And people can trust your genuineness.
Yeah.
I use the wrong pronouns with some people sometimes as I'm, as they're transitioning.
Right.
And I feel bad, but they just, it's okay, just, this is it, like, I don't
Right.
even notice.
I'm trans and I use the wrong pronouns sometimes. Like, it's just a thing that happens. I don't expect myself to be perfect. I don't think anyone expects me to be perfect.
Yeah.
But, you know, as long as that person knows I care about them. The only thing that I would like to share is I think everyone should read more about transgender history, and I have a really good book to recommend. It's called Transgender History by Susan Stryker. I think it's important to note that this book that I really love was written in 2008, and you may recognize that as being before the year 2016, which is when a lot of people think the transgender phenomena started, and that's just not true. Yeah. There's hundreds of years of transgender history and social and political development, and, you know, a lot of things that you probably know about have connections to transgender history and people in the past that were trans, and a lot of those are covered in this book. So if there's any doubt in your mind that, you know, this is something that's brand new and no one's ever talked about this before, I would really recommend looking at this book. Also, if you just want to learn more about the history of the world, look at this book. But outside of that, I think that's about it.
Well, thank you so much. You're wonderful.
Yeah, of course, thank you.
I just think Keldy's amazing. I'm so grateful that you're able to hear his story. A couple of my takeaways are just how important I think it is to talk to real people, hear real people's stories, and hear their why. I think it's really easy to jump to conclusions about people, especially things we hear in the media. You might jump to a conclusion about what someone that is transgender has really experienced, is really thinking, is really feeling. But when you hear Keldy's why and realize that for him, transitioning actually saved his life, I think our outlook can really change. We can be a little bit less quick to judge, and it can help us have a little bit more empathy for someone in that space. I think it's really important to remember that if we're struggling with a certain story or a certain space or a certain group of people, to be intentional about seeking someone out and hearing their story before we make big conclusions and assumptions about them. Anyway, again, thanks for being here. We'd love it if you would take time to leave a review or subscribe as we continue to try and grow Sit With Me.